January 15, 2027, South China Sea, 0300 hours. The USS Gerald R Ford sits 95 nautical miles from the Chinese coast, her massive silhouette backlit by deck lighting as flight operations continue into the pre-dawn darkness. She's moving at 13 knots, slower than a jogger running a comfortable pace. Every 90 seconds, another F-35C Lightning II launches from her electromagnetic catapults, the distinctive whine of the email system cutting through the humid tropical air. To the military analysts monitoring satellite feeds in Beijing, this looks like opportunity incarnate, a $13 billion target following a predictable course, maximum vulnerability during cyclic operations. They're calculating firing solutions right now, running simulations on targeting systems that have been designed for exactly this scenario. The distance is perfect, yet the positioning is catastrophic. The Americans have made a strategic blunder that violates every principle of standoff warfare, or so it appears. But they're making a fatal mistake. They're doing the wrong math. They're calculating range and vulnerability using 20th century logic applied to 21st century warfare. They see a target. What they should see is a trap. Today, on our Navy channel, we prove why the most exposed position on the map is actually the most secure. We demonstrate why vulnerability is sometimes the most effective form of deterrence. And we decode the invisible architecture that transforms a sitting duck into an untouchable asset. Let's run the numbers. At 95 nautical miles offshore, the Ford is deep inside the kill box. The DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missile, NATO designation CSS-5 Mod 5, has a published range exceeding 900 miles from its mobile launcher. But operational range calculations aren't measured from factory specifications. They're measured from battery position to target coordinates. Factor in the coastal defense installations positioned on Hainan Island, subtract the carrier's current position, account for the ballistic trajectory required for terminal guidance, and you're looking at a flight time of approximately 8 minutes from launch authorization to impact. 8 minutes. The missile ascends to the edge of space, traveling at Mach 10 during its terminal phase descent. That's 7,600 miles per hour. The Ford's maximum sprint speed, even with her 2 nuclear reactors pushing through all 4 propeller shafts, is 30 knots. In practical terms, that's roughly 35 miles per hour. You cannot outrun physics. You cannot turn a 100,000-ton vessel fast enough to evade a weapon descending from the thermosphere. And each DF-21D costs the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force approximately $11 million per unit. That sounds expensive until you contextualize it against the target value. For less than 0.1% of the carrier's construction cost, China could theoretically remove America's most powerful naval asset from the chessboard. Beijing's strategic planners have run these calculations 10,000 times. They've built an entire doctrine around anti-access area denial, specifically engineered to keep American carriers beyond the second island chain. They see vulnerability. They see mathematics favoring the attacker. They see a cost-benefit analysis that makes the engagement economically viable, even if only 1 missile in 10 reaches its target. What they don't see is the network. What they haven't calculated is the invisible war that begins long before any missile leaves its rail. What they fundamentally misunderstand is that American carrier operations aren't about the ship. They're about the system. And that system is already winning a battle that hasn't officially started. Before that DF-21D ever leaves its mobile launcher, before the Chinese technician even receives launch authorization through the encrypted communications network, before the radar operator confirms target lock, an invisible war has already been won. 30,000 feet above the South China Sea, at an EA-18G Growler from Electronic Attack Squadron 133, has been flying racetrack patterns for 6 hours straight. The pilot is exhausted, sustaining alertness through a combination of cockpit airflow and professional discipline. But the systems mounted under his wings are just warming up. The ALQ-249. Next-generation jammer mid-band isn't a defensive tool. It's an offensive weapon system that rewrites the rules of electromagnetic warfare. Here's the physics that changes everything. Old generation jammers from the 1990s, the systems that protected carriers during the Gulf War and the Balkans campaign, used brute force methodology. They broadcast white noise across entire frequency ranges, essentially flooding the electromagnetic spectrum with interference. Like turning on every light in a house simultaneously to blind an intruder. Effective but crude, and tactically problematic because the enemy knew exactly where you were. You were screaming electronically across every radar band, announcing your position while hoping the noise wall was sufficient to prevent targeting locks. The ALQ-249 uses gallium nitride semiconductor technology to create something entirely different. Think of it as Photoshop for radar returns, real-time manipulation of electromagnetic signatures at the speed of light. When Chinese early warning radar sends out a pulse searching for the carrier, that pulse is a specific waveform with unique characteristics: frequency, timing, modulation, polarization. It's a fingerprint. The Growler's system captures that waveform in microseconds, digitizes the signal. It analyzes the pattern using onboard processing algorithms and transmits back a modified return, not noise, not jamming, a lie. The technique is called range gate pull-off, and it exploits a fundamental vulnerability in how radar systems calculate distance. The Chinese radar operator sees the carrier at 95 miles. His screen shows a clean return, solid contact, high confidence. 1 second later, the target appears at 97 miles, then 102 miles, then 108 miles. His fire control computer tries to generate a weapons lock, feeding targeting data to the ballistic missile battery, but the target keeps sliding away on his display. Not because the Ford is moving. The Ford hasn't changed course at all. Her actual position remains fixed at 95 nautical miles. But the mathematics of the radar return are being rewritten in real time, and the operator's perception of reality is being systematically dismantled. He doesn't know he's chasing a ghost. His screen shows green. His systems show nominal. Every diagnostic check passes, but the firing solution he's calculating, the trajectory data being fed into the DF-21D's guidance computer, is for a ship that doesn't exist at those coordinates. By the time he realizes the deception, by the time his commanders order a system reset and attempt to reacquire the target, he'll have wasted precious minutes and the actual carrier will have shifted position. This isn't jamming. This is perception warfare. We don't blind the enemy. We feed them false reality and let them make decisions based on corrupted data. But suppose by some miracle the Chinese battery launches anyway. Suppose the Growler's electronic deception fails. Suppose the operator recognizes the range gate manipulation and compensates. Suppose Beijing decides the strategic value of the kill justifies the risk of expending the weapon. The DF-21D clears its mobile launch rail. The solid rocket motor ignites with 50,000 pounds of thrust, and the missile accelerates skyward, punching through the troposphere at Mach 5, arcing up toward the edge of space before tipping over into its terminal dive phase. 8 minutes to impact. The warhead is maneuverable, equipped with terminal guidance fins that allow the missile to adjust its trajectory during descent based on updated targeting data. This is where conventional analysts say the carrier is doomed, where the mathematics of interception appear impossible. They're wrong. 50 miles to the east of the Ford, at maintaining station in the outer defensive ring, the USS Lake Erie, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser commissioned in 1993 but upgraded with baseline 9 combat systems in 2019, has been watching that launch facility for 72 consecutive hours. Her AN/SPY-1D radar array, 4 massive fixed panels generating 6 megawatts of electromagnetic energy, has been painting the entire coastal defense network with continuous surveillance. The moment the DF-21D's rocket motor ignites, the radar return signature spikes dramatically. Heat bloom, velocity profile, trajectory projection. The Aegis combat system doesn't wait for human authorization. Engagement protocols have been pre-authorized by the strike group commander based on rules of engagement that permit defensive response to confirmed threats. If the vertical launch cell doors open with pneumatic precision and an SM-3 Block 2A interceptor erupts from the deck, riding a column of flame, accelerating past Mach 3 in under 4 seconds. This missile doesn't chase the threat. It calculates intercept geometry based on predictive algorithms. The DF-21D is arcing upward at Mach 10, following a ballistic parabola that physics dictates. The SM-3 climbs straight up at Mach 15, not pursuing but intercepting, meeting the threat at the apex of its trajectory. They're going to collide at 85,000 feet, well above the Kármán line, in the vacuum of space where there's no air resistance to slow either weapon, no atmospheric interference to degrade sensor performance. Here's the physics that makes this possible. The SM-3 doesn't carry a warhead. It doesn't need explosives. What the kinetic warhead is essentially a 175-pound chunk of hardened steel with steering fins and an infrared seeker. At the moment of intercept, both missiles are traveling at a combined closure speed of Mach 25. That's 19,000 miles per hour. That's 5.3 miles per second. When metal hits metal at that velocity, conventional physics gives way to plasma dynamics. The kinetic energy is so immense that steel doesn't bend or shatter or deform. It undergoes instantaneous phase change. Solid metal transforms directly into superheated plasma. The temperature at the point of impact exceeds 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than the surface of the sun. Both missiles, the attacker and the defender, cease to exist as physical objects. They vaporize into an expanding fireball visible from the ground for 200 miles. A brief new star appearing in the pre-dawn sky. This is hit-to-kill technology. We don't use proximity fuses or fragmentation warheads. We weaponize velocity itself. We turn Newton's laws of motion into total destruction. The Chinese operator who launched that DF-21D watches his tracking display for 8 minutes, waiting for impact confirmation. It never comes. His missile simply disappears from every sensor, every tracking system, every satellite feed. No explosion, no debris field, just absence. And now he has a bigger problem, because 45 seconds after his missile launched, the USS Hawaii made her own launch. Below the surface, running silent at 400 feet depth, the USS Hawaii, a Virginia-class attack submarine with a crew of 134, has been on station for 96 hours. Her nuclear reactor allows unlimited submerged endurance. Constrained only by food supplies and crew psychology. She's been tracking the same coastal defense battery that just fired, her passive sonar arrays triangulating the location based on electromagnetic emissions, seismic signatures from previous test launches, and intelligence updates from national assets. Her Virginia payload tubes, vertical launch systems integrated into the bow section that don't exist on older submarine classes, are loaded with Tomahawk Block 4 cruise missiles. GPS coordinates are pre-programmed, target priorities are established, and the moment the DF-21D launch is confirmed through data link from the Lake Erie's Aegis system, the Hawaii's captain gives the order. 4 Tomahawks launch in sequence, breaking the surface 60 miles from the carrier, accelerating to 550 miles per hour. Flying at treetop level to avoid radar detection. Flight time to target is 14 minutes. The missiles use terrain-matching guidance, comparing the landscape below to stored digital maps with accuracy measured in meters, adjusting course in real time. They don't just hit the launch site. They hit the mobile launcher, the command vehicle, the radar truck, and the ammunition transport. 4 targets, 4 missiles, 4 simultaneous impacts. Each Tomahawk carries a 1,000-pound warhead. The launch facility that threatened the carrier disappears in a coordinated strike that leaves nothing operational. The surviving Chinese personnel don't attempt to launch again. They're too busy trying to survive. And here's what Beijing's analysts completely failed to calculate. That submarine wasn't protecting just the ford. She's been maintaining targeting solutions on 17 coastal defense sites simultaneously. Every ballistic missile battery, every anti-ship cruise missile launcher, every coastal radar installation within 400 miles has a Tomahawk assigned to it. The Hawaii isn't a defensive asset. She's a scalpel, a surgical instrument that removes threats with precision before they can evolve into actual danger. This is offensive defense. We don't wait to be attacked and then respond. We identify the capability to attack and remove the capability. The paradigm shift isn't in the weapons technology. It's in the operational doctrine. American carrier strike groups don't defend against threats. They eliminate threats before weapons are ever employed. But suppose the impossible occurs. Suppose multiple launch sites fire simultaneously. Suppose the SM-3 interceptors are overwhelmed by the volume of incoming threats. Suppose a DF-21D survives the exoatmospheric intercept and continues its terminal descent toward the Ford. The missile is now at 50,000 feet and dropping, traveling at Mach 10, maneuvering based on terminal guidance updates from its onboard seeker. Impact in 90 seconds. This is where the final defensive layer engages, the last line before the missile reaches the ship. The USS Wayne E. Meyer, an R. Lee Burke-class destroyer positioned 12 miles from the Ford, has been tracking this exact scenario through her SPY-6 radar system, the newest generation of naval radar with 35 times the sensitivity of older systems. Her Mark 45 5-inch gun is irrelevant against this threat. Her close-in weapon systems are ineffective against ballistic targets. But her vertical launch cells carry something specifically designed for this terminal phase. The SM-6 missile is a multi-mission weapon capable of engaging aircraft, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles in their terminal descent phase. It launches with the same violent acceleration as the SM-3, but its mission profile is different. It's not chasing the threat into space. It's intercepting during the final 60 seconds of flight when the ballistic missile is most vulnerable because it's committed to a specific trajectory. The SM-6 doesn't just rely on its own radar. It receives mid-course guidance updates from the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye circling at 25,000 feet. An airborne early warning aircraft with an AN/APY-9 radar system that can track 1,000 targets simultaneously at ranges exceeding 300 miles. The Hawkeye isn't just watching the battle, it's conducting the battle, providing targeting data to every platform in the strike group through secure data links operating at megabit-per-second transfer rates. The SM-6 intercepts the DF-21D at 15,000 feet. 40 seconds before impact. This time there's an explosion, a massive blast fragmentation warhead that doesn't need to physically hit the target. It detonates within 30 feet, sending thousands of tungsten fragments through the missile's structure at hypersonic velocity. The DF-21D disintegrates, its warhead tumbling unpowered toward the ocean, its guidance system destroyed, its aerodynamic profile compromised. Debris impacts the water 3 miles from the carrier. Not 3 miles and 100 yards, not 2 miles and 1,500 yards, exactly 3 miles. The Ford's crew doesn't even feel the impact. Flight operations continue without interruption. Another F-35C launches 90 seconds later, precisely on schedule. And the Chinese command center watching this unfold through satellite feeds realizes something horrifying. They just expended a weapon that took 5 years to develop, $11 million to produce, and months of training to employ. And it never came close. Not because they missed, not because of mechanical failure, but because the Americans built a defensive architecture with so much redundancy, so much overlapping coverage that a weapon has to survive 4 separate kill opportunities before it even has a chance to threaten the carrier. Beijing's strategists look at their spreadsheets and realize the mathematics don't work. To guarantee a kill, they'd need to launch simultaneous salvos exceeding the strike group's defensive capacity. That means 50 or more ballistic missiles fired in coordinated waves. At $11 million per missile, that's $550 million of ordnance. To kill a ship that would be replaced within 24 months. The cost-benefit analysis collapses. The doctrine fails. The anti-access strategy becomes economically unviable. But here's the question American taxpayers should ask. Why position a $13 billion asset and 5,000 human beings where a hostile power can theoretically reach them with advanced weapons? Why not stand off at 500 miles, safe beyond any threat radius, and conduct operations from a sanctuary distance? The answer comes down to two variables that sound abstract until you put human faces on them: velocity and blood. First, velocity. The F-35C Lightning II, sitting on the Ford's deck, has a combat radius of 670 miles on internal fuel without external tanks or aerial refueling. Sounds like massive operational margin. But combat radius isn't the same as effective response time, and response time is measured in minutes that matter. Launch preparation on a Ford-class carrier takes 11 minutes minimum under optimal conditions. The aircraft must be positioned on the catapult using the deck tractors, connected to the electromagnetic aircraft launch system with the shuttle assembly. Full systems check, conducted by the plane captain, pilot strapped in and helmet connected, final clearance received from the air boss in primary flight control. That's 11 minutes before the jet even moves. Then add flight time. At 95 miles from the coast, an F-35C reaches a hostile capital at cruise speed in approximately 14 minutes, flying at 450 knots with weapons loaded. Total time from alert scramble to overhead presence, 25 minutes. Now compare that to a carrier positioned at 500 miles offshore, the standoff distance that conventional wisdom suggests for safety. Same 11-minute launch preparation, but flight time balloons to 67 minutes at the same cruise speed. Total time from alert to overhead presence, 78 minutes. That 53-minute difference isn't a tactical inconvenience. It's not an acceptable margin in the cost-benefit analysis. It's the mathematical boundary between life and death. Because the second variable is blood, and blood operates on a countdown timer that cannot be negotiated. A Marine on the ground conducting security operations takes a round through the femoral artery from small arms fire. His heart is pumping 5 liters of blood per minute through a circulatory system that's now compromised. The femoral artery, when severed, dumps blood at approximately 500 milliliters per minute, even with a tourniquet applied 2 inches above the wound. Do the math. He has approximately 60 minutes before exsanguination, before total blood volume loss results in hypovolemic shock and cardiac arrest. Not 61 minutes, not 59 minutes. Exactly 60 minutes from the moment the wound occurs. This is called the golden hour, and it's not a guideline or a best practice or an operational goal. It's a physiological countdown timer based on blood volume and perfusion requirements for brain tissue. Yet after 60 minutes without surgical intervention, without whole blood transfusion, without vascular repair, survival rate drops from 98% to below 40%. 1 hour is the difference between a Marine greeting his family at the airport and a chaplain delivering a folded flag. Now, subtract the overhead that cannot be compressed. The MV-22 Osprey conducting casualty evacuation needs 8 minutes to spool up rotors and lift off from the deck. A function of engine start sequences that cannot be rushed without risking mechanical failure. The casualty evacuation team needs 6 minutes to secure the wounded Marine, establish IV access, stabilize the C-spine, and get airborne. The flight deck needs 4 minutes to clear the landing zone for the returning aircraft, moving other helicopters and jets out of the recovery area. Sure, that's 18 minutes of fixed overhead, subtracted from the 60-minute window before anyone is even flying toward the wounded Marine. You have 42 minutes of flight time available. An Osprey cruises at 240 knots in airplane mode, which converts to exactly 4 nautical miles per minute. Multiply 42 minutes by 4 miles per minute, and you get a maximum theoretical range of 168 miles. But combat is chaos, and theoretical maximums are graveyards for Marines. Add evasive maneuvers for hostile fire, add weather delays for brownout conditions during landing, add margin for navigational error in GPS-denied environments, And the safe operating distance isn't 168 miles. It's 95 miles. That's the number that guarantees the golden hour is preserved with sufficient margin that variance doesn't become fatal. That's why the Ford is exactly where she is. Not 94 miles, not 96 miles, exactly 95 nautical miles. And who's operating the AN/SPY-6 radar system on the Wayne E. Meyer, tracking those ballistic missile threats? A 20-year-old operations specialist from Ohio who enlisted because his father worked in a steel mill that closed when he was in 8th grade, because college tuition was economically impossible, because the Navy offered technical training and a pathway to a future that didn't exist in his hometown. He's been standing watch for 8 consecutive hours in the Combat Information Center, staring at radar displays in a darkened room, cooled to 65 degrees to protect the electronics. His feet hurt. His eyes are burning from screen fatigue. His lower back aches from standing on steel deck plates. But his job tonight, watching those radar returns, while maintaining tracking solutions on inbound threats, feeding fire control data to the Aegis weapon system, is the reason 10 Marines are coming home instead of 10 families receiving notification visits from casualty affairs officers. That 20-year-old from Ohio doesn't know he's the critical node in a weapons engagement sequence. He just knows his watch station responsibilities and the technical manual procedures he's executed 5,000 times in training. But when that SM-6 intercepted that ballistic missile at 15,000 feet, when those tungsten fragments shredded the threat 40 seconds before impact, it worked because he maintained track continuity through a scenario where most people would panic. American naval power doesn't come from $13 billion ships. It comes from 20-year-olds executing geometry problems perfectly under pressure. So how does the United States Navy position a floating city inside a hostile missile envelope and not just survive but dominate? Not through luck, not through superior courage, through system architecture that transforms individual platforms into a networked organism. The Ford is the visible piece, the queen on the chessboard, drawing attention, projecting power, launching 75 aircraft into the battle space every 24 hours during sustained operations. She's the center of the formation and the primary target of enemy planning. But she's not alone, and focusing on the carrier while ignoring the system is the fatal flaw in every adversary's calculus. The Lake Erie, that Ticonderoga-class cruiser maintaining station 50 miles to the east, is the bodyguard. Her AN/SPY 1D radar is painting the entire electromagnetic spectrum in 360 degrees, tracking every airborne contact within 200 miles, discriminating between commercial aircraft and military threats, between ballistic missiles and orbital debris. The SM-3 interceptors in her vertical launch cells are the shield that operates in the exo-atmospheric kill zone, eliminating ballistic threats before they reach terminal phase. The Wayne E. Meyer, positioned 12 miles from the Ford, handles the terminal defense layer with SM-6 missiles and evolved Sea Sparrow missiles for closer range threats. Below the surface, the USS Hawaii has been on station for 96 hours, silent running at 400 feet, her Virginia payload tubes loaded with Tomahawks, GPS coordinates pre-programmed for every coastal defense battery within 400 miles. She's not defending. She's the hammer waiting to strike. If a threat launches, those Tomahawks launch 14 minutes later, and the launch facility ceases to exist as a functional military asset. Above the formation, the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye is the conductor of this orchestra, the platform that transforms individual ships into a unified weapon system. Its AN/APY-9 radar can track targets at 300 miles, managing over 1,000 contacts simultaneously, discriminating between threats and neutral traffic with artificial intelligence-assisted algorithms. It's not just watching the battle, it's directing it. Every data point from every sensor, ship radar returns, aircraft radar contacts, satellite feeds updated every 12 seconds, sonobuoy detections from submarine aircraft. So all of it fuses into a single tactical picture, transmitted in real time to every platform in the strike group through Link 16 data links operating at 1 megabit per second. The F-35C pilot doesn't just see his own radar display showing contacts within his sensor range. He sees the entire battlespace rendered from the Hawkeye's perspective, projected directly onto his helmet-mounted display system with target tracks updated twice per second. The destroyer captain doesn't just command his ship's weapons. He commands the collective firepower of the entire formation through cooperative engagement capability. One ship's radar can guide another ship's missile. The Aegis system on the Lake Erie can launch an SM-6 that's guided to target by radar data from the E-2D Hawkeye, killing a threat that neither platform could engage alone. The submarine can launch Tomahawks based on targeting data from an F-35 100 miles away that detected a mobile launcher with its electro-optical targeting system. This is cooperative engagement capability, the technological manifestation of networked warfare. This isn't a collection of ships sailing in formation. This is a distributed organism with a networked nervous system operating at the speed of light, with redundant sensors providing overlapping coverage, with weapon systems that can be cross-cued from any platform to any target. Remove the Hawkeye, and the system loses its long-range surveillance and its ability to coordinate beyond line of sight. Remove the cruiser, and the defensive bubble against ballistic missiles collapses. Remove the submarine, and the offensive punch that eliminates threats at the source disappears. Yet remove the Ford, and there's no aviation capability to project power beyond the horizon. But with all pieces in position, networked through secure data links, operating under coordinated rules of engagement, you don't have a vulnerable carrier sitting in a kill box. You have a trap. A weapons engagement zone. A mathematical certainty that any adversary who presses the launch button won't survive to assess the results. And the adversary knows this. Beijing's military planners aren't stupid. They've run the simulations. They've calculated the probabilities. They understand, that sinking an American carrier isn't a tactical victory. It's the opening move in a conflict that escalates to total war. And total war against the United States Navy means losing every surface combatant, every submarine, every naval aviation asset within 72 hours. The carrier isn't in the kill box. The entire South China Sea is the kill box. And the Ford is the bait that reveals which enemy platforms are willing to expose themselves for targeting. The USS Gerald R. Ford, that looked like a vulnerable target at 95 miles offshore, has proven to be something entirely different. Not a liability, a statement, a demonstration of capability wrapped in deliberate positioning. Because 3 weeks after this operation, when that Marine with the femoral artery wound wakes up in a hospital bed at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, when he sees his wife and his 3-year-old daughter for the first time in 8 months, when the surgeon tells him the vascular repair was successful and he'll make a full recovery, it's because someone did the math. Someone calculated that 95 miles was the precise distance where aircraft velocity and casualty evacuation timelines converge, where threat response time and golden hour survival rates intersect, where American firepower and adversary capability reach an equilibrium that favors the defender. Not 94 miles, where the margin for error becomes unacceptably thin. Not 96 miles, where response time increases by 90 seconds and survival probability drops by 8%. Exactly 95 nautical miles. And that 20-year-old operations specialist from Ohio, the kid who was exhausted after an 8-hour watch staring at radar displays, who wanted nothing more than to get to his rack and sleep for 6 hours before the next watch rotation. And he doesn't know he just participated in an operation that will be studied at the Naval War College for the next 20 years. He won't get a medal. His name won't appear in any press release. There won't be a ceremony or a promotion board mention. But his job that night, tracking electromagnetic signatures, maintaining radar locks through electronic warfare interference, feeding targeting data into the Aegis network with precision that allowed a missile to intercept another missile at closing speeds exceeding 19,000 miles per hour, was the difference between life and death for people he'll never meet. That's what American naval power actually is. Not the ships, not the missiles, not the billion-dollar technologies that make headlines. It's 20-year-olds from towns nobody's heard of executing technical procedures with perfect discipline under pressure. It's the institutional knowledge that trains an operations specialist to maintain track continuity when every instinct says to freeze. It's the engineering philosophy that builds redundancy into every system because Murphy's Law is more reliable than any weapon. The United States doesn't need to invade your coastline to project power. We can position a floating city 95 miles offshore, protected by mathematics, physics, and sailors who refuse to accept the phrase, "it can't be done." We can operate inside your threat range because we've calculated every variable, war-gamed every scenario, and built systems that turn your best weapons into wasted ordnance. This isn't a threat, this is a geometry demonstration. It's a physics proof written in steel and electrons. The calculations are final. The defensive architecture is validated. The watch is set. If this breakdown of tactical positioning and weapons engagement mathematics changed how you understand modern naval warfare, type "Killbox" in the comments right now. And if you respect the engineering and the people behind these systems, hit that subscribe button because we're just getting started. Next week we decode why submarines don't hide anymore. Stay connected. Thanks for watching.